I'm educational justice coach Lindsay Lyons, and here on the Time for Teachership podcast, we learn how to inspire educational innovation for racial and gender justice, design curricula grounded in student voice, and build capacity for shared leadership. I'm a former teacher leader turned instructional coach. I'm striving to live a life full of learning, running, baking, traveling, and parenting because we can be rockstar educators and be full human beings. If you're a principal, assistant superintendent, curriculum director, instructional coach, or teacher who enjoys nerding out about co-created curriculum with students, I made this show for you. Here we go. Welcome to another episode of the Time for Teachership podcast. This is episode 241, and so you can get the show notes and all of the info at the blog post, lindsaybethlyons.com/241. Today, we're talking all things pedagogies of voice. This is a beautiful, beautiful book. I loved Street Data, as you probably know if you listen regularly to this podcast. I am constantly citing Street Data because it's excellent. And this is kind of the second version that really, not second version, what is it called? Sequel, there we go, that kind of follows up and says, how do we situate this idea of Street Data in instructional realities, like within the classroom? What does this look like? So this book, Pedagogies of Student Voice, Street Data, and the Path to Student Agency, was written by four awesome humans: Shane Zafir, Saswan Jaffer, Crystal Watson, and Marlo Bugsik. I'm really hoping I'm pronouncing everyone's names correctly. They are incredible, and I would love to have them on the podcast, so stay tuned. Perhaps we will get them. I think they're very busy. They've been making the rounds of all the places. But this episode is really just going to keep in mind this idea of school transformation and school redesign, elevating schools from good to great, and how do we take some of the brilliant ideas in this book and apply them to perhaps a strategic plan, a kind of new approach or mental model to how we're going to move forth in partnership with students and not just as a team of adults. So here we go. One of the things that I love is that they really anchor in a liberatory purpose of education. They have this beautiful, beautiful art throughout the book and framework grounded in the olive tree, which is important to Palestine and rooted as a symbol of justice, which I really appreciate. And this idea of this liberatory purpose of education being one that is co-created with students, right? An educational experience where students are true partners and co-creators, where students can ask questions of society that they live in. They develop critical literacy and numeracy. They shape the conditions of their lives. They develop their own moral compasses, right? What do they think is right from wrong? What is truth from fact? And perhaps my favorite one, although I do love all of them, is to witness and affirm one another's humanity. Like, how cool would that be if all of our schools centered the witnessing and affirmations of one another's humanity? I think often we talk about student-led discussions and discussions of high emotion topics on this podcast. And I think often we avoid or feel uncomfortable with topics of discussion that bring up high emotions because we are fearful that someone's humanity will not be affirmed, will not be witnessed, will not be we will just not uphold someone else's humanity or dignity, right? Or that someone in the class will not. But if that is a core tenet of who we are as a school community, then we are going to make sure that we approach all of the things, including the class discussion, but all of the things, all of the policies and instructional practices and ways of being with each other in that school community with that in mind. And I would just love if that was, stated and also lived by, right, as a way of being, which they're going to talk about. They talk about in the book, and we'll talk about shortly here. Throughout, there's of course tons of ideas of street data to gather. Everything from having student voice in report cards to noting nonverbal engagement in a classroom visit, tracking feedback that is both affirming and corrective. And I think there's so much that we often collect as data. And of course, if you haven't read the book Street Data, please go back and read that because it's excellent. If you are a podcast listener, listen to Street Data Pod, which is with Shane Zafir and Alcine Mumby as co-hosts, and they get into a lot of the concepts of the book in audio format with amazing guests. So that's great. But we often focus on this idea of, satellite or map data, which is just a bit more removed from the day-to-day student experience of being in school. And so we want to make sure that we are as close as possible to kind of that street level view of what students are experiencing. I also just love that at some point they talked about how, quotes and transcripts and also nonverbals from discussions, from discourse in the classroom, are artifacts of street data. Like they are about the student experience. You can notice what the students are kind of all grappling with, right? And how learning is happening, which is just such a cool idea, is like student-led discussion or discourse transcripts as street data. It just made my heart sing. Okay, so as we are thinking, through this school transformation, school redesign lens, a couple things that I wanted to share. One, they share 4 criteria of good inquiry questions, which does stem from the Street Data book with Jamila Dugan and Shane Zafir as co-authors. So one is that it needs to name the specific group of students or adults. It could be like, I think families or someone at the margins. So we have to like center the margins, right? That's a key component of kind of their equity transformation cycle. Should name an uncomfortable truth that doesn't blame learners and is in our locus of control. I do love this because I'm always looking for good language around this. Adaptive leadership scholars, I'm always citing Heifetz, Grashow, and Lindsay on this, saying, there's the kind of this underlying belief, habit, or loyalty, which is a thing that lies at the heart of adaptive challenges. And we have to get to that. And so I'm always advocating for a root cause analysis that gets to that. And I just love the phrasing of uncomfortable truth. So good. Our good inquiry questions should allow for inquiry and probing. Love that. And it can be used to gather street data to reimagine our pedagogies. I love all of this. So thinking about as a leadership team, an instructional leadership team, a school redesign team, whatever your team is, one, and I said this in the previous episode a few episodes ago, but just, I always say there should be students and folks at the margins at the table, like on the team. But that also that we are first co-creating an inquiry question, right? And doing these things, naming the group we're looking at and seeking data from, street data from, naming an uncomfortable truth and being able to ask additional questions and probe to learn more. So I think that is something that is often missing from school transformation efforts or kind of redesign efforts. They talk about the 10 toxins, which also were in street data. I won't give the whole book away. You need to get the book. There's so many things in here. But I'll just say some highlights that I think are things we talk about a lot and just want to emphasize. 1, teacher is expert, right? 2, rugged individualism, this idea of sorting kids, ranking kids, doing independent projects when really in life we often learn and thrive with each other, right? As what we do together. I often feel like this as an instructional coach and PD provider. What I do with colleagues is always better. It is always better than what I could do by myself. Could I do it faster by myself? Yes. It's better? No. So rugged individualism is a toxin. Containment, containing, whether it's students to desks in seated positions. Don't walk around my classroom, right? Don't go out of the halls. Containing within the school, right? No field trips, that kind of thing. We can't learn within the larger community. Schooling has to happen in seat, right? And this idea of scarcity mindset, which is common when we talk about pacing guides, or I don't have time to do circles and center belonging. I don't have time to do revision and resubmission on a project after I give feedback. I have to just give them feedback, give them the grade, and then we don't do anything with it, right? Because of time constraints, time being the biggest scarcity mindset that I notice, but I think there's so many that come up in education. So just be wary of those toxins and of course get the book for all 10. But then they say kind of this complementary or not complementary, kind of like the flip side of this, right? 10 ways of being include 10 points. I want to highlight 5 here. One is deep listening. This has been truly on my heart for a while now, but deep listening to one another, particularly at the margins, intergenerational learning. I recently listened to a Mind Shift podcast episode about a preschool that was co-located with an elderly community. It was beautiful. It was so beautiful and joyous. And it just warmed my heart, but also just activated my imagination to think about the possibilities here and to know that many homes and families are inclusive of like three generations. And we often see that as a deficit. We don't often talk about the assets that the opportunities that provides for intergenerational learning. And how do we design classrooms and school communities with that in mind? How do we partner better with families and community members of multiple generations and truly have a partnership where we're learning in community with one another? That could be central to school transformation efforts. Additionally, holism, like treating the whole person, schools as sites of healing, and relationality as a core way of being, right? We are in relationship with one another. We are not here to just, put information in your brain and send you on your way. We are in true relationship. We are going to remember each other for years and decades to come. We mean something to one another. We are curious about one another's personhood, and we are committed to healing harm, particularly harm that has been done by school systems to the kids that are in front of us, perhaps by previous schools, perhaps the school we're in, perhaps the previous generations of schools. Excuse me, of families. Like families are going to have a hard time coming to institutions of schooling that were harmful to them, right? There's so many opportunities and reasons for schools as sites of healing. Now, the core piece of this book is pedagogies of voice. So they have 8 kind of pedagogies they focus on, and I love their metaphor of like a seed store where you can find these different practices. They have so many links and QR codes to really specific practical resources that again are just amazing, as well as like videos of students being reflective and oh, it's so good. The book is so good. But they support 4 agency domains, these pedagogies of voice. So identity, belonging, inquiry, and efficacy. And so I'll just name some of the pedagogies of voice. And you can kind of think about as you order the book and wait for it to be coming to you, ways that you might be able to do this, to make this happen, to make it core to your practice amongst adults, as well as your practice instructionally with students. So this idea of storyorientation, which is a word from Shane Saphir coins for one of her earlier books, this orientation towards stories. I love it as being central to supportive of identity, as well as other things, of course. I think these are all kind of intersectional agency domains. Micro affirmations, right? Where can we just constantly being affirming of kids' strengths, right? And have an asset mindset. I love the idea of micro affirmations. And I've talked before about having values language present in the space, in the classroom, so that students, when given the opportunity, can share a value or an appreciation for another person in their class. Like this affirms that idea. So I love it. Belonging, radical inclusion, and circle up. I talked about circles a lot. I love them. I think it definitely amplifies a sense of belonging. Inquiry, I think this is the biggest place that I think for instructional kind of, I wouldn't say it's like hardest, but I think there is such tension between how we've historically done things in this agency domain and where we could go with it, that it feels sometimes like the biggest lift. So I just want to name here, those 2 things are questions over answers. So having a curiosity stance, having inquiry stance, to posing great questions and creating great questions. We talk about this when we're designing student-led discussions and discourse opportunities. We want to create a really thoughtful prompt so that students are interested and have opportunities to connect. They actually have a great list of like what makes a good compelling question or discussion question, and I think that's worth taking a look at. But this idea of question over answers and centering student-led discussion in trying to grapple with those questions and answers is key. and a huge shift away from, the teacher talks at at someone. Feedback over grades is the second piece here too. And so thinking about equitable assessment and what that looks like. And I mean, they cite Joe Feldman. We've also talked about Asao Inouye on this podcast, and his work. I think there's so much here. We've done a whole series about, go back and listen to those episodes. But being able to value the feedback, which is about, growth and learning and the joy of learning and building on our skills and being in community and in relationship with one another over grades, which prioritizes like these structures of traditional schooling and these principles like rugged individualism where we rank each other. I mean, that just, ugh. Right? It's a huge shift though, because we are often operating in these really seemingly confining situations. But again, I'm thoughtful about the scarcity mindset and the toxins that we shared earlier. And then finally, efficacy as an agency domain, making learning public. I love this idea, both like from the standpoint of when I was working in New York Performance Standards Consortium School in New York City, we would have portfolios that students would use at the end of the year to kind of, that was what their graduation or moving on to the next grade. And ultimately, their graduation from high school was based on in lieu of Regents exams in many cases. But even when it wasn't, we would still do them because they're so valuable to have a community of people giving you feedback and just having an authentic audience. But also this idea of kind of like place-based learning and being rooted in a place and being in community with people outside of your school system. I've been heartened to think deeply about and be in spaces around civic showcases in Massachusetts and New York, and this idea of being in community with young people who are striving to make change, and that partnership, youth adult partnership, is critical for that, and that's a way to make learning public. And as well as this idea of reflection and revision is so critical and reminds me of Zaretta Hammond's work around kind of that reflection. And I think about metacognition and meta-strategic thinking and that coaching that happens student to teacher and teacher to student. So I think that's also really on my heart.
Hi, this is Leah popping in to share the freebie for this episode, the Post-Unit Perception Survey. You can find it at the blog post for this episode, www.lindsaybethlyons.com/blog/241. Now back to the show.
I will finally share there's a last section in this book that I love that is a nod to leaders. And as I am talking in part of this leadership series here and addressing school transformation and redesign, thinking about how we, yes, collect the data, yes, develop the inquiry question, but once you have that data in response to that inquiry question that you have co-created ideally with students and multiple stakeholders, like what do you do there? And so the authors share a really great 60-minute sample agenda. And I'll just talk you through kind of the components of it, and you can get the book to dig in a little deeper. But one, there's like this very human check-in to start, right? Because we're whole humans. Then when we observe the data, we have this opportunity to reflect as a group, but we stay low inference. We don't interpret at this point. We're just kind of noticing. And then when we interpret, we're naming patterns or themes on post-its. I think they recommended like 3 words or less. Like what are those high level themes? And then think to yourself, like, what's most important and why? Like, what do you think is the most important thing that is coming up in this street data that we're looking at? I love that there's a feeling section. So just having a few minutes to say, what are the emotions that came up for you as you were engaging in this? And then, having a whole group discussion of like what matters, what's our greatest opportunity here, what's an entry point for shifting our pedagogy. So that equity transformation cycle is really important. So we're doing the deep listening, we're uncovering like what is the data actually telling us. We're thinking about how we're going to move forward. I think this is something that could be truly transformational. It's just doing this 60-minute activity with your leadership team. Once you have gathered some street data and learned about the experiences of folks you have identified as being on the margins in relationship to, what do they have to say about their experiences related to your inquiry question. So all sorts of stuff to get from this book, Pedagogies of Voice. But again, thinking about that orientation towards witnessing and affirming one another's humanity as part of a liberatory education is really something that I have been thoughtful about. So yes, there's all of these ways of doing it, and I think the book will be your guide here for this. But just to know what your kind of core purpose is, to have a great inquiry question guided by identifying who's at the margins and being wary of those various toxins, right? Teacher as expert, rugged individualism, containment, scarcity mindset, and instead doing some deep listening, intergenerational learning, healing, and being in relationship with one another. A final note I will share is that it's actually in a footnote in this book. I was recently I had to write a proposal for doing some work with the state, and they said use an active verb. And I had written experience as the verb, and then I doubted myself, and I was like, oh, they're not going to think this is an active verb. In this footnote, they say, here's a note on experience as a verb. Quote, it makes room for qualitative outcomes that are harder to measure but equally valuable. They go on to say, this signals an orientation to identity development and belonging as core dimensions of learning. So absolutely, experience is a verb that is an important one, and in alignment with the street data principle that what matters isn't always what's easy to measure. I really think this is a valuable takeaway. So good luck with your transformation. Let us know how it's going. Let us know which of these pieces you gravitate towards and what you'd like to learn about next and what you're going to grapple with next as we go on and make our schools amazing places to be humans. And for all of the notes and the show notes and blog posts for this episode, go to lindsaybethlyons.com/blog/241. If you like this episode, I bet you'll be just as jazzed as I am about my coaching program for increasing student-led discussions in your school. Shane Safir and Jamila Dugan talk about a pedagogy of student voice in their book, Street Data. They say students should be talking for 75% of class time. Do students in your school talk for 75% of each class period? I would love for you to walk into any classroom in your community and see this in action. If you're smiling to yourself as you listen right now, grab 20 minutes on my calendar to brainstorm how I can help you make this big dream a reality. I'll help you build a comprehensive plan from full-day trainings and discussion protocols like Circle and Socratic Seminar to follow-up classroom visits where I can plan, witness, and debrief discussion-based lessons with your teachers. Sign up for a nerdy, no strings attached brainstorm call at lindsaybethlyons.com/contact. Until next time, leaders, think big, act brave, and be your best self.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. Explore more podcasts at www.teachbetterpodcastnetwork.com. We'll see you on the next episode.